The promise of the Buddha. The division of the Buddha's path into 8 steps does not imply that it's a vertical ladder. It's not necessary to master one step before moving on to the next. The path is more like a spiral. When you set out on the path, you have a certain amount of understanding of all 8 steps. As you keep practicing, the steps become clearer and clearer in your mind, and you progress to the next stage. There are, however, several useful ways to think about the path as a whole. For one thing, it's clear that greed, hatred and delusion are the 3 most powerful, unwholesome factors and the source of all kinds of suffering. Opposing these are the 3 most powerful aspects of the path: skillful understanding of the Buddha's teaching, skillful effort to overcome greed, hatred and delusion, and the practice of skillful mindfulness as the means of overcoming those states. These 3 factors, understanding, effort and mindfulness, support each other and work together to move you along the path. Understanding the Buddha's teaching takes effort. It is certainly much easier not to strive, not to change, just to take life for granted, and to continue in whatever patterns of thought and behavior have become your comfortable habits. Yet the Buddha taught that as long as people do not understand the truth, they will pretend they have no problems, or despair that their problems are unsolvable. Yet if you make the effort, you will understand much. Mindfulness can help. In fact, without mindfulness, you will never understand anything. You can make effort, you can struggle, but if you do not have mindfulness, you will never progress in your understanding. Through mindfulness, you can understand the truth of dissatisfaction, its cause, its end, and the path leading to its end. Moreover, when you practice mindfulness, you make the effort to keep the mind clear of greed, hatred and delusion. Thus, practicing mindfulness requires effort, and the combination of mindfulness and effort frees the mind from misunderstanding. The other steps of the Buddha's path also rely on these 3 factors: skillful thinking, skillful speech, skillful action, skillful livelihood, and skillful concentration can be cultivated only with the support of understanding, effort and mindfulness. Without skillful understanding, you will not see why it is important to work on improving these other aspects of your life. Without skillful effort, you will find it impossible to progress toward your goal of positive change. And skillful mindfulness is the supreme tool of awareness and attention that helps you combat your negativities and strive toward perfection. Another way of thinking about how the 8 steps of the path work together is to group them into 3 clusters: morality, concentration, and wisdom. Each cluster pushes you toward the practice of the next, and toward a more comprehensive understanding of the path as a whole. How does this work? The first cluster begins with a certain amount of understanding. You understand, for instance, how greed causes dissatisfaction, so you begin to practice generosity. You also understand how hatred and cruelty cause suffering to you and to others, so you decide to practice loving friendliness and compassion. These 3 thoughts, generosity, loving friendliness and compassion, are skillful thoughts. You have to be wise to cultivate these positive thoughts. That wisdom comes from skillful understanding. Therefore, skillful understanding and skillful thought are grouped together as the wisdom aspect of the path. The second cluster grows out of the first. When you look at your life with wisdom, you see how peaceful and happy you are when you think and act in positive ways. Your wisdom also helps you understand that the dissatisfaction you experience is caused by your greed and attachment, and that when you eliminate these causes, your dissatisfaction ends. This understanding motivates you to improve various aspects of your outward behavior. Since you see that lying, malicious words, harsh language, and gossip cause pain, you avoid these types of negative speech and resolve to speak politely and meaningfully. Since you see how much pain and dissatisfaction is caused by killing, stealing, drinking, and sexual misconduct, you avoid these negative actions. Instead, you appreciate the lives of other beings and try to spare them. You respect other people's property. You avoid alcohol and act appropriately in your sexual behavior. Since you understand the suffering caused by wrong livelihood, you seek a wholesome way of making your living that supports your spiritual practice. The outward changes implied by skillful speech, skillful action, and skillful livelihood are clustered together as the morality aspect of the path. The third cluster is based on your understanding that outward changes alone will not end your dissatisfaction and suffering. You see that actions begin with thoughts, and that unwholesome thoughts themselves cause you tremendous suffering. Therefore, you try to train and discipline your mind. When you start to watch your mind, you see that in spite of your good intentions, harmful thoughts of greed, hatred, delusion, and doubt arise again and again in your consciousness. You see further that the only way to combat these mental traps is to apply sincere and diligent effort to avoid negative thought patterns, to overcome them when they do arise, and to cultivate and maintain positive thoughts. Moreover, you see that mindfulness is essential for positive change, both external and internal. Developing mindfulness is not easy without concentration, for it is concentration that helps you see things as they really are. These three, skillful effort, skillful mindfulness, and skillful concentration, are grouped as the concentration aspect of the path. So round and round you go, practicing the 8 steps of the path. With each round, your greed, hatred, and delusion are reduced. With each round, your understanding of the truths of dissatisfaction, its cause, its end, and the way to end it deepens. No matter where you start the path, the steps link up and support one another. No matter what your level of understanding at the beginning, the result of the path is the same: the end of suffering and ultimately the highest degree of peace and happiness. Enlightenment. Some people ridicule the idea of enlightenment. In internet chat rooms where the Dhamma is discussed, I have observed that people use derogatory terms, even angry and profane words, to describe enlightenment. Perhaps they misunderstand what enlightenment is. Enlightenment is nothing less than extinguishing the burning pain caused by greed, hatred, and delusion. It is putting out once and for all the fire of birth, growth, decay, death, sorrow, lamentation, grief, and despair. The people who ridicule enlightenment may fear that when they extinguish this fire, they will be left with nothing to live for, in the cold darkness of despair. They may be confusing this painful internal fire with the fire that initiated civilization, or with the fire of electricity. But when the painful fire of delusion is extinguished, what prevails is not the frigid air of a pitch-black winter night. It is not a grim, lifeless state. Not at all. When the fire of greed, hatred, delusion, birth, growth, decay, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair is extinguished, the result is total peace, total calm, total tranquility, total inexpressible happiness, while the mind and senses are at the same time 100% clear, pure, and energized. Enlightenment is inner light, inner brightness, inner warmth. From having laid down the burden of all the psychic irritants, greed, hatred, and delusion, the mind and body feel buoyant. We are not accustomed to feeling so light. We are used to having a heavy head, a heavy heart, a heavy body. The prospect of having such a light heart makes us feel a little nervous. We're afraid that this lightness will make us light-headed. Our heaviness, our suffering is so familiar that we fear becoming disoriented if we let go. Something like that happened to a friend of mine. His job transferred him to another office, and he moved to an apartment next to a busy train station. When he first moved to this new apartment, he could not sleep for many nights because of the noise of the trains and the crowds of people coming and going. A few years later, he was transferred to another office and had to move again. His new apartment was very quiet. Again, for many nights he could not sleep. He had grown so used to the noise and commotion that he actually needed it to relax and fall asleep. Like my friend, we get so used to our heavy and uncomfortable habits of mind that we fear we will miss them when they're gone. Our situation also reminds me of a man I read about when I lived in Washington, D.C. This fellow was serving a life sentence for committing murder. Because of his good conduct in prison, after 10 years, he became eligible for parole. One day, a newspaper reporter interviewed him. "You must be very happy that you are eligible for parole," the reporter commented. No, please don't talk about parole," the man replied with some agitation. He said that he felt comfortable with life in prison. He enjoyed privileges such as watching television, and prison life did not have the insecurities of life outside. But I asked myself, had he really become so accustomed to the violence of prison life, the endless restrictions, the tyranny of the guards? Had he forgotten the joy of living beyond the prison walls, the feeling of fresh air, the beautiful open spaces, the good food, and the freedom to meet other free people? Had he become so attached to conditions inside that freedom seem strange and unappealing? People who ridicule enlightenment are like that man in jail. They cling to what they have. They don't want to leave the comforting familiarity of their discomfort, but they don't know what they're missing. Enlightenment is not something you wish for. It is the state that you end up in when all your wishes come to an end. As the Buddha said, "What use is there for a well if there is water everywhere? When craving's root is severed, what should one go about seeking?" When you know you are missing something, you keep looking for it. When you have each and everything you ever wished for, you don't seek anymore. Because you have attained perfect peace, perfect harmony, you are content to allow everyone else to live in peace and harmony. At the end of the great discourse on the 4 foundations of mindfulness, Mahasatipatthana Sutta, the Buddha guaranteed that if somebody practices mindfulness meditation exactly in the manner it is prescribed, then that individual attains enlightenment within this lifetime. If not fully enlightened because of some subtle fetters holding the person back, then he or she will at least become a non-returner, reaching the 3rd stage of enlightenment. The Buddha did not mean to imply that enlightenment can be achieved by a person who practices only some limited part of the path. Enlightenment requires that you develop thoroughly every aspect of morality, concentration, and wisdom. Moreover, in making this rather astonishing promise, the Buddha did not mean that casual, occasional practice, working at it every now and then, would be sufficient. He meant that to achieve enlightenment, your practice must be characterized by relentless dedication, energy, and perseverance. In order for you to gain concentration, your efforts must be supported by perfectly clear morality. Your concentration must be wholesome and one-pointed. This powerful concentration must be cultivated with equally powerful mindfulness. Then, supported by pure morality and skilled concentration, the wisdom that brings liberation takes place. Still, some people find the Buddha's words to be an unrealistic promise. I wonder what grounds they have to challenge it. Are they like a person who hates to have wet feet and doubts that anyone can swim as fast as Olympic swimmers? Or like someone who has never run even a step and doubts that anyone can finish a 26-mile marathon? Of course, the Buddha's promise must seem unrealistic to someone who has never sat on a meditation cushion or tried to watch the breath for 1 minute. And it may seem like a hollow promise to those who have sat in meditation for many years, but have never practiced all of the 8 steps comprising morality, skilled concentration, and wisdom. Meditation requires sincere discipline. You undertake the discipline of meditation not to impress anybody, but to free your mind from the suffering caused by your own negativities. If you approach the Buddha's path like a hobby or a game, it will not work. The 8 steps of the Buddha's message are not something that you learn about and then put into practice only when you need them. Come to think about it, you do use the 8 steps only when you need them, but you need them every single moment of your life. Your mindfulness of the 8 steps of the Buddha's path, however, does not have to be perfect in order for you to start the practice. If your mindfulness of the path should lapse, don't worry. Simply become mindful of the unmindfulness as soon as you are able. Your success as you begin to walk the path depends on whether you maintain a strong intention to be mindful at all times, not whether you are actually able to do so. As you keep reminding yourself to be mindful, your lapses become fewer and fewer until mindfulness of the path becomes automatic. If you make that kind of effort, you will progress quickly. Then you'll be the kind of student the Buddha had in mind when he made his promise. Come and see. This book offers only the essential guidelines for following the path. As your practice deepens, if you refer back to it again and again, you may find that it continues to serve as a useful guide at any level of understanding. But it has not explained everything you will need to know about the Dhamma, about practice, about your own experience, and about what you will achieve. Different individuals have different backgrounds, education, intuitions, understandings of the Dhamma, and levels of spiritual growth. Moreover, the questions that you have tomorrow will be very different from the ones you have today. Even the Buddha could not come up with one discourse that covered every exigency for every person. That is why he gave many thousands of Dhamma sermons. This book has presented a summary of these and some explanation of their most significant points. You will fill in the rest through your practice. The present moment is your teacher. Turn it into your own personal laboratory. Pay attention. Investigate. You alone can generate wisdom in yourself. You do this by pursuing what is skillful. A rather skeptical audience once demanded that the Buddha tell them why they should believe him when they had heard so many other holy men claiming to possess all the truth. The Buddha responded that they should not believe anything just because someone somewhere said it's true. Sources such as hearsay, documented reports, traditional beliefs passed down over many generations, scriptures considered to be holy, words of a highly respected and credible teacher, and teachings from someone you think of as your guru, all lack any guarantee of truth. The Buddha said that these things should not be accepted on faith. The Buddha then said that truth cannot be uncovered through reasoning either. He said you should not believe something just because it appears to be logical, or seems to take you closer to your goal, or appeals to your inclinations, or appears true after you have engaged in reflective reasoning. Why? Because the Dhamma still has an aspect that none of these things, not even reflective reasoning, can catch: your own experience. The Buddha gave one general standard for what we should accept. This standard is not based on any kind of faith or reasoning. Rather, he said, when contemplating an action, ask yourself whether, based on your own experience, such an action would be harmful to anyone, including yourself. If it is harmful, it is not skillful, and the action should not be done. If it is beneficial to everyone, including you, and if people who are wise would approve it, then it is skillful, and the action should be done. The Buddha later elaborated that once a deed is done, you should re-examine it. You should ask yourself, how well did that deed actually go? Was it really skillful? If not, and you reap the results with tearful eyes, the action should be avoided in the future. If it is skillful, and you reap the results with cheerful eyes, the action should be done repeatedly. If you pay close attention and stay honest with yourself about what you know to be true, then, without having to believe anything anybody else has said, you begin to choose actions that develop your purity and wisdom and that bring increasing happiness. Only you hold the key to your liberation. The key is your willingness to look within and decide what actions are skillful for bringing happy results. Do you want to see the Dhamma? Look at your experience. Use your experience as a mirror reflecting the Dhamma. All the impersonal patterns of the universe are there. In your day-to-day life and in your moment-to-moment existence, you can see all there is to see anywhere. Cause and effect, impermanence revealed by the constant flow of changes on every level, suffering wherever there is clinging, and the fact that no matter how hard you try to track it down, no self can be found in any of them. Do you want to know about your experience? Look at the Dhamma. There you see all the impersonal elements and patterns that make up you. There, too, you see that what you experience is the same, in its essence, as what is experienced by any other being. Dhamma is thrust in your face everywhere you turn. Even watching a bug strolling in a pot of water, for example, can spark your insight into the reality of the fear of death shared by you and all beings. The entire Dhamma is revealed in every experience in your life, every moment, every day. It is right there to be seen, with no blind faith or theoretical reasoning necessary. From this kind of rigorous observation, you gain confidence in the practice and proceed along the path. Until you have become deeply familiar with the path and see the Dhamma in your own experience, the knowledge gained from this book will remain theoretical. If I were pointing up toward the North Star, you might stare at me and wonder, why is he pointing like that? Shouldn't he point over here, or maybe over there? How would you explain a star to someone who has never looked upward at night? Until you tilt your head enough to be able to see the stars and then follow the directions for examining the sky until you manage to pick out the North Star, there will be doubt in your mind. This doubt gives rise to all kinds of questions. But when you catch sight of the North Star and observe for yourself the way everything else revolves around it, then you have no such doubt. Similarly, until you glimpse the goal, you will have many questions about the path, about the teaching, about your own practice, and about why I have said certain things in this book. How can words explain what Nibbana is like, given that Nibbana is non-experiential? Experience happens through our senses, and whatever labels we could use to describe non-experiential states are misleading, as they are based on sensory experience. We just have to follow the steps of the path all the way to the end and see for ourselves. Have you ever tried to point at something for a cat to see? The more you point, the more the cat will want to sniff your finger. The cat will never look beyond the finger. If you finish this book and say, "Is that all there is? Where is ultimate truth? I didn't get anything out of this," you are like that cat. Look beyond the words of this book. Use the kinds of actions suggested by the Buddha to propel yourself into another way of understanding. Walk the path for yourself. This path is spread across all the experiences of your life as you cultivate increasing skillfulness in thought, word, and deed. When you have skillfully and thoroughly followed the steps for purifying your mind, you will finally catch sight of the truth of the impermanence of all experience, of the suffering that follows from clinging to what is impermanent, and of the lack of self in all things subject to impermanence and suffering. You will see how greed holds together all suffering experience. At that moment you see for yourself, and all your questions cease. If you don't believe in the greater goals described in this book, that is okay. It still may be useful to you. Just use this book to help you keep asking questions about your own experience. Try to learn something from everything that happens to you. The Buddha often said, "Come and see." He meant, come and look inside your own body and mind to see the truth, the Dhamma. You won't find it anywhere else.